What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Panda here. Today we're going to be talking about gear and what to do with it. Should you keep it? Should you level it up? When should you level it up? When should you get rid of it? And all the things you could possibly think about gear. I'm going to be breaking this video into a couple different areas, including the early game, the mid game, and the late game. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Let's dive right in. What's up, guys? Welcome back. First part of the video is going to be when. That's what we're answering first, is when should you farm gear? When should you level up gear? When should you equip certain types of gear, etc.? So first things first, guys. We have the raids, okay? We go to the raids, we go to the gear raids. We have 3 dungeons, technically four, because we do have gear dungeon 4. This is a very time-limited event. It only happens once every, I think, 2 weeks, and it lasts for about a week. It just came. We just had our first iteration of it a few days ago. It ended about a week ago, actually, I think now. And so now we're going into the waiting period for the next part of Gear Dungeon. So don't worry about that one so much right now. Let's specifically talk about Gear Raid 1, 2, and 3. So we have Gear Raid 1. Gear Raid 1 is all of your left side gear. This is going to be your armors and your weapons. This is a really important gear set, and I highly recommend you focus on Gear Raid 1 first. A lot of people are going to be like, that doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? And the reason I say this is because RNG is a big factor in whether a piece of gear is good or not. For example, if I were to go in and I were to get a piece of gear on the right side that was, say, let's go Guardian, right? If it was a Guardian set of gear, which has a 3-piece set bonus of reducing damage taken by 15%, and it has a tack percent main stat, it doesn't matter what the secondary stats are because this is not a DPS set of gear. Now, of course, in the early game, you care more about stats than sets, which we'll discuss as well. But by going first for your left side gear, you're going to be able to eliminate a large chunk of the RNG when it comes to getting a good piece of gear. And by doing so, you will increase the ability for your champions to deal damage, to survive, to heal, etc. by having good left side sets of gear. That's my personal recommendation. Of course, everyone has their own thing. A lot of people say to focus on Gear Raid 3 first because it's considered the easiest. However, I think that Gear Raid 1 is relatively easy in comparison to Gear Raid 3. And Gear Raid 3, in my opinion, is actually a little more reliant on specific champions than Gear Raid 1 is. Gear Raid 1, we've seen a lot of new champions enter the hero pool that provide the ability to block things like healing in the form of things like Boreas. We have Lasir, we have Zealous with his exclusive artifact, and several others that have come into the game recently. And so Gear Raid 1 actually seems to be quite a bit easier from my opinion. Now, of course, I've already cleared all 3 of these dungeons, so I'm at maybe not 100% of what it looks like in the early game, but I do think still focusing Gear Raid 1 is important. Gear Raid 1 is all about magical damage, so you want to deal AoE magic damage because there are a ton of monsters that come in. You'll see here the recommended people are all DPS that deal magic damage. So, for example, you've got your Viernas, your Comets, your Ajaxes, your Morrigans, etc. Now, these, of course, are all legendary heroes. They don't have to be legendary heroes. In fact, if we go down, you will see some heroes in this pool are not legendary. For example, Mari, who you get for free, Laurel, who is an epic, Hollow, who is an epic, Dolores, who is an epic, right? Of course, all the damage dealers here are legendary, but it does not mean that you have to clear it with those champions. For example, I cleared my first Stage 18 by using Abomination. I used Abomination and a defense down champion. Mine specifically was Hatsut, but it could be anyone that deals defense down. And he was able to clear this as basically my sole DPS. It's definitely possible to be able to do it, and he is a free champion. You can fuse him, so definitely not a bad idea to use him. But if you do get your hands on any of the really good mages, even some of the epic mages can do it. For example, if we scroll down here, we can look. Greed is a really good one. You get him for free. I think it's on day 30. I don't remember exactly, but you get him for free. He can do Gear Raid 18 very easily. Picking up someone like an Aatrox, he does magical damage in an AoE, so he could potentially help a lot as well. And then, of course, using people like Mari to CC them or Maul to push them back and freeze them, etc. are very, very good. And, of course, any of the legendaries that you get that are mages will be able to do stage 18 very easily. For example, Kriya, although she's probably considered one of the worst legendary mages, she was actually the way I was able to clear my first stage 19 in Gear Raid 1. So it's definitely possible, guys. Don't think, oh, I have to have Comets, I have to have, any of these super, super top tier AoE mages. You don't have to. It's possible to use it with other people. Then, of course, we have Gear Raid 2. I went to the wrong place. We have Gear Raid 2. And in Gear Raid 2, this is all about survivability, okay? There are strats, which I actually have videos on my channel that are helpful with the Volca strat. However, the Volca strat does require you to be pretty far into the game. I want to say you need to, I think it's like day 18 or 19 before you get your Volca, and then you actually don't get the ability to use Volca until very late, because you have to come into Tide and get your first copy of the Volca Soulstone, which I don't remember where it is. It's somewhere around here. Let's find it. Is it 100? Or is it further than 100? I think it's further than 100. 105. Yeah, here we go. On 105, you get your first Soulstone, which unlocks her ability to reduce the revival time of your champions. If we come here, you'll see it. Allies redeployment time is reduced by 25%, which allows you to remove your champions for the big AoEs that the boss does and put them back down. So that is a strat you can use. However, it is dependent specifically on being at the point where you're on stage 105. Now, keep in mind, you can only do 3 stages per day, and that's assuming you can clear all 3 of those stages, which you may not be able to do. Now, of course, they have changed the Tide since I went through it the first time, so it may be a little easier. You may be able to clear it on the exact day that you'd be able to do all 3 stages every day. So you may get there a little faster than I did. It is definitely possible. But another way you can do this is by just bringing survivability. So, for example, one of the biggest champions here is going to be Sadie. Sadie has the ability with her ultimate to reduce incoming damage and then have that damage be dealt over time. So by bringing her and an additional healer, like, for example, a Medon, a Vortex, a Hollow, or one of the legendary healers like a Gwendolyn or a Eloin, could be very, very good. And then, of course, you just need a ton of tanks, a ton of fighters, a ton of ground units, and typically you're going to do this with one big AoE damage dealer, probably a tile damage dealer. A lot of people use Silas, a lot of people use Comet, a lot of people use... what's her name? Vierna, right? A lot of people use a lot of different things here. So, for example, I did my first clear by using... excuse me, by using a combination of Hatsut and Zillatu on my stage 18s and my stage 19s, and then I believe I used Vierna for the rest of my clears. But Silas works as well. Silas is a single target damage dealer, but he does so much damage that he's actually able to basically one-shot all of the mobs when you get to a certain level, so he works as well. But the big ones you're going to be using, you're going to keep your look out for Decimus. You're going to want to look out for your Barons, your Vortexes, your Doloreses, all of these really good epics that you get in the game, and any other tanks that you happen to get are very good as well. And in here, you're going to get access to right side pieces of gear. Specifically in here, what you're looking for is typically the defensive and support gear sets. For example, your Guardian sets, like we said before, probably the best set in the early game for a tank. Then we also have the Invigoration set once you get up to the higher stages, which is really, really good for pretty much every support in the game, because it allows you to apply an attack boost to a champion within range, which is very, very good. You do have some DPS sets in here. For example, Ageless Wrath. This is a very good DPS set, but the other DPS sets I would consider better in most situations. You also have some other ones like Styx, Night Terror, Curse, and Fatality. These are okay sets, nothing super crazy. The only other set in here that's pretty good is going to be your Glacier set. This is really good on certain champions such as Abomination, who have very high health pools but want to deal damage based on attack. You can use this with a bunch of attack percents or even some HP percent main stats and get a decent chunk of both survivability and damage from it. It's a pretty decent sort of middle of the ground pack set. Then we have Gear Raid 3, probably the most important gear raid, which is going to contain, again, more right side gear. The sets in here are very, very good. You have sets such as Mana Spring. This is very good in the early game and even sometimes in the late game for increasing the rage that a champion generates on their auto attacks. You also have Hawkeye, Doom, Wisdom, and Insight, as well as Fracture, which are all very good early game DPS sets. Most of the time, you're going to be using Doom for your single target damage dealers, Wisdom for your ultimate based champions, and Insight as just a way to help mitigate crit rate when you're missing crit rate on your gear sets. Then you have your Asclepius set. This is very good for tanks because it has max HP. It's also very good for your healers who are HP based. It's also good on non-HP based healers because it does have this 20 healing effect, but primarily you're going to be looking for max HP healers. Then we have the two big boys of Gear Raid 3, and that is your Soulbound Arcana and Infernal Roar sets. Now, these two sets are very, very important because you want to deal damage. That's what this game is about. Tanking and healing is not as important as damage. So picking up a Soulbound Arcana, which gives you up to a 50% damage increase at max stacks, is very powerful. Also using an Infernal Roar set, which gives you 40% damage on basic attack skills, is very, very good for certain champions such as Zillitu and Silas, who all of their damage, including their ultimate, is based on basic attacks, because their ultimate just empowers their basic attacks, meaning they get a ton of extra damage during their ultimate with their basic attacks, and that's multiplied by the set bonus of Infernal Roar. Now, Gear Raid 3 is all about ranged physical damage, specifically single target ranged, specifically ranged single target physical damage in the form of things such as Silas, Calypso, Idril, several specifically DPS champions. Now, this area, the reason I say this is probably the most difficult one is because this is one that is so incredibly champion specific. It's very difficult to clear this without certain champions. Now, it's possible, but it's very difficult. You need to have, in almost every situation, you're going to want to have an Idril. She's probably the best champion in the game for Gear Raid 3 because she has this ultimate that also, when she gets kills, allows her to add additional shots once you get awakens. I think it's her A5, yeah. During the effect of the ultimate, every kill extends its duration by 3. So that's really, really important because you're killing a lot of enemies over time. She's very, very important there. You also almost always are going to need a Piercer Lord, Lunaria, Aracha, the Coming, Eovar, all very good options there. Now, again, this isn't required, but it's very, very helpful. It will allow you to push much further in the early game. Also having champions such as Dolores for the attack boost, Laurel for the rage regen, and Hollow for the rage regen and heals, same thing with Elowen, are all very good. Then, of course, you need to have a champion to help you kill the boss. These champions are typically going to be your Silases and your Cetrums. Those are probably the two best champions in that slot, but it can be done with other people. Some people will use Zillitu, for example, to kill the boss. It's not as effective, but it's possible. Some people have also used Poisoners because you can poison and deal percent max HP. I do believe that the poison change makes that not nearly as effective, but getting your hands on someone like a Silas or a Cetrum is going to be very good for clearing that. Then you need, there's a lot of things happening here. You need a big AoE damage dealer for the left side of the map. That's going to be your Razak, your Nyx, your Mauls. There are some other people that are decent there as well, but those are the three sort of primary ones. And then you have your right side. Now, your right side is very specific because they have no protection. They have no way to survive unless they are unable to be targeted, which is why you see Hatsut and Allura here up here in the top of damage dealers, because they both have invisibility built into their kit. Hatsut's a little more difficult to use, but it can be done. Allura is basically a free win on the right side. You never have to worry about it because she goes, you choose when to take her invisibility off, which means she can be 100% protected, while Hatsut is very specific to a time frame. So, Gear Raid 1, 2, and 3 are the three main topics. Highly recommend you focus on your Gear Raid 1 in the early game. Once you get to stage 18, that's the best place to farm because it eliminates the gold or the yellow, whatever, the legendary gear from the pool, and you can only get mythic gear, which is the highest level that you can get is your mythic and your ancient mythic gear. However, you do want to try to push to 19 as soon as possible. The reason is because you start to farm additional things, specifically the new Sanguine Fabric and Smoldering Scale, which allows you to craft gear in the Forge, which allows you to get access to the Gear Dungeon 4 gear early. It also, as you see here, it also adds in the red sets of gear. Your Immortal Warrior, your Warlord. If you come over to Gear Raid 3, it includes your Soulbound Arcana and your Infernal Roars once you get to Stage 19. Now, once you get to Stage 19, you can stop here for a while. Stage 20 and Stage 21 are a big jump in difficulty and only really change slightly in things such as a little bit of an increase in your percent chance to get Ancients, a little bit of an increase in your percent chance to get Bouillons, and a little bit increase in terms of your gold generation. So it is important. You do want to try to make pushes to Stage 21 because that is the most efficient form of energy to value. But getting to at least Stage 19 is very important. You want to get to Stage 18, Stage 19, and then Stage 21 are kind of the three breakpoints for pushing in the end game of gear raids. Now, let's talk about what you should be looking for. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go look at some of my good pieces of gear. If we look on the left side here, you'll see that I have a DPS set of gear. The reason that this is the DPS set of gear is because it has a attack percent and attack speed set bonus, which means that it's going to increase my attack and my attack speed, which is DPS stats. So what I'm looking for on this set of gear is DPS secondary stats that are going to go along with that DPS set. So we have attack bonus, crit rate, attack speed. That's a perfect piece of gear. However, this is more of a mid to late game piece of gear. One of the other things you should be looking for in the early game is where are you going to get the best value for your gear. And right now I'm going to tell you it's in this shop. In the early game, you're going to get access to this gear sooner than you will be able to clear the gear raids of that difficulty. You'll be able to come in here and buy your legendary gear for a measly amount of gold, which is going to give you a pretty big jump in your ability to deal damage, which means you're going to make more progression quickly. I highly recommend checking this shop as often as possible, using all of your gold refreshes every day to purchase the gear in here until you're able to farm effectively in the gear raids. Once you're able to do that, you can stop purchasing this gear. You'll see here that I don't buy gear in here very often. I will sometimes buy some pieces of gear. For example, if I see a Guardian piece of gear in here, I will buy it because I don't tend to get a lot of Guardian drops. And I'm just hoping for a decent Guardian piece because I don't have nearly enough. But ultimately, you'll eventually move into gear dungeons and you're going to be looking for stats over sets. So for example, let me see if I can find... here's what, right? This is my Valkyra. This is not the best set in the world, don't worry about it, but the point I'm trying to make here is you'll see on the right side, I don't currently have a set. The reason I don't have a set is because this has good stats on it, right? I have good stats on these pieces of gear that make it so that this set works. Now, could I go and find an additional fracture piece? Sure, I definitely could go find an additional fracture piece in this set, but it may not be as good as the current piece of gear I have on. If we go and look at some of my tanks, you'll see the same thing. Let me see if I can find one of them that has, let's see here. No, where is it? Here we go. Like this one right here, right? I've got HP, 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 but I don't have a set bonus on my Baron. And so because of that, I'm not getting the set bonus, but I'm getting the stats. And in the early game, it's going to be very difficult for you to get stats and sets. And it's going to be very hard to progress if you're trying to find stats on sets. So your goal is just to get good stats. Primarily, you're going to be looking for a good main stat first, not worrying about the secondaries. Then eventually, once you've got that, you'll be looking for a good main stat with 1 or 2 good secondaries, moving on to a main stat with 2 to 3 good secondaries. And then once you've gotten to that point, you'll be looking for the correct sets with 1 to 2 good stats and a good main stat. And repeat that process all the way through until you have, sets of gear like myself. If I go to my Silas here, I have very good set on my Silas, right? I have attack bonus with 4 DPS stats. Beautiful. Here we've got crit damage with 3 DPS stats, attack, rage, regen, and crit rate. And here we've got crit damage with 3 DPS stats, attack, crit rate, and rage regen. Then over here, we've got the same thing, right? We've got 3 DPS stats. Here we've got 3 DPS stats. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, when it comes to leveling your gear, in the early game, just level the gear that you need to level to make the progression. I do highly recommend only going to certain points. For example, on a blue piece of gear, I'll go ahead and buy these just to show you, because I have the gold, don't worry about it. We'll come in here and we'll go and we'll look at the sets. We'll look at blue, purple, and gold. So here we go. We're going to pretend like these are good. So this goes up to 12, right? I can take this up to 12 because I have 3 stats on it. However, let's assume that this was a better piece of gear. I may not want to take this to plus 12. I may only want to take it to example for plus 8 because it's not really worth the gold to invest into that last stat. Same thing here with purple. This has only up to plus 8. It's totally usable. You can go to plus 8 if you want. And if we look at the blue, which I'm not sure where it is, here we go. If we look at the blue, this only has 1. Go ahead and take your blues up to plus 4. It doesn't hurt you too much. Go ahead and take your purples up to plus 8. And then when it comes to your yellows, I do recommend you only go to plus 12 if it has a viable stat on plus 12 and it makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Let's go ahead and sell those pieces of gear because I don't want them. And then we'll move on to sort of how you should be deciding when to level your gear, as well as when to stop leveling your gear. Now, in the early game, you need to make progression. So your goal is going to be to just level the gear in order to get progression. Don't worry about specific events or anything like that. However, once you get into the mid game and the late game, gold will become partially a problem if you are not effectively farming. And so because of that, you want to only level your gear during an event. For example, we have the Tales of the Smith event happening right now, which is why I'm making this video, because I only want to level gear during this event, because as you can see, I only have 6 million gold. Now, I did just blow a bunch of gold during the fusion, so that's why I don't have a lot right now, and I haven't been playing the game super active at the moment because I've got some other stuff going on. So I haven't been able to sit down and actually farm gold with a gold boost going on. However, I do want to make sure that I level up my gear. So I'm looking for specific gear pieces that have good stats on them that I want to level up. So I'll go ahead and find one. So for example, this is a Soulbound Arcana piece. This is a good piece for me to level up. It has a attack % main stat. This is a DPS set. It has crit rate, rage regen, and flat attack, which is 3 DPS stats. So what am I going to do? I'm going to level it up to 8. The reason I'm going to level it up to 8 is because it does not cost me a lot of gold to level it up to 8. I can level this up to 8, and if it rolls poorly, I can sell it and make back a decent chunk of the gold it costs. Sometimes even make more, depending on how many times it took you to level up. So we'll go ahead and level this up and see how this rolls. It did not roll very well, right? It's still a very low crit rate, very low rage regen. So I'm going to sell this piece of gear. And you'll see I made 10,700 gold back. Then we can go on and move on to another piece here. Let's find one. Here. Let's find a piece I want. Okay, this is an okay piece. No, never mind. I thought this was a different stat. Hold on. One moment. Un momento. Let's see. Attack bonus. Here we go. This one will work, right? This is an okay piece. It's not the greatest piece in the world, but it's an okay piece, specifically because of how some things work in Immortal Codex. I'm going to level this piece up. Because there are attack-based healers do actually do healing based off of max HP as well, like a portion of the HP. So it actually makes sense sometimes to have these pieces of gear. So this would basically be a 4-statted piece of gear. So what am I going to do? I'm going to level it up to 8. I'm going to see how it rolls. It did not roll amazing, right? But it is possible to roll it to 12 and still make my gold back. That rolled pretty decent. However, because the other 2 stats didn't roll amazing, I'm not going to keep this piece of gear. Now let's look at a DPS piece of gear. So what I like to do here is I like to filter by crit rate, because crit rate is the most important stat in pretty much everything in the game. So let's find a crit rate DPS set. Boom, boom. Here we go. This is a good piece right here. We have attack % main stat with rage regen, crit rate, and attack speed. What are we going to do? Same thing as before. We're going to level it to 8, see how it rolls. It rolled pretty decent. Not amazing, but not terrible. We'll roll it to 12 and see how the HP bonus goes. All right, so it did not roll amazing. I am going to keep this, and the only reason I'm going to keep this is because I need crit rate pieces of gear, but I'm not going to level it to 16 quite yet because it's not amazing. There are some other pieces, though, that we can look for. Let's see if we can find something. So here we go. We have a curse set. This is a DPS set with attack percent main, crit rate, attack speed, crit damage. Same thing, guys. We're going to level it to 8. It did not roll well. What are we going to do? We're going to sell it. Hopefully this makes sense to you. Hopefully it's all kind of coming together. We're pretty much repeating the same process on all of our gear, looking for things that make sense, because there are some pieces of gear that are just not worth investing in anymore. And so we want to be careful about how we're using our gold and not wasting it on stats that just don't make sense. So I'm going to roll this. This is a perfect set. Whoa, that rolled really well. So this is what when you have a piece of gear that rolls really well, like this piece does, that's when you want to go to plus 16, because then you have a very well rolled piece of gear. Look at this. This is a very good piece of gear. It is a DPS set. It has DPS main stat with 4 DPS secondary stats. This is an amazing piece of gear. This is a piece of gear you should be striving to get. Now, although it is Night Terror, which is not the best set in the world, it is a good potential DPS set for some situations. But guys, I think that's going to cover the majority of it. If you want a more in-depth video, if you want me to do more stuff specifically, let me know in the comment section down below. I would love to make more content if it's something you guys want, but I wanted to do a sort of, I'm kind of trying to get stuff ready for the beginner players, because I'm sure we have new players that are coming in. And I want to kind of make some content for the newer players and also potentially help out some of the mid-game to late-game players if maybe you're not doing things as efficiently as you could be. So hopefully you guys like this. If you want more, make sure to leave a comment down below. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button to let me know that you liked it. And also, please, please, please hit that subscribe button so that we can hit 5K subscribers. Tell your family. Send it to your guild. Let's go. Have a good day, guys. Peace.